Hey, this is Mr. Milleman, and I'm back to talk to you about the interaction of living things. You might be amazed to know that everything interacts, whether it be animals, plants, bacteria, fungi, even the non-living things within our environment. Water, air, rocks, they all interact with each other. Let's take a look at how. So if we take a look at this big boy right up here, that's an elk. Well, elks live in the colder areas. The taiga, sometimes the tundra, usually not that far up. But they live in an area that's pretty cold. They got a big body. They can handle it because they've got a fairly warm system that they're working with. Well, one of these is called an organism. If we put a group of them together, it's called a population. And that population is when our elk meets up with his herd. And there's a whole bunch of elk in there living together. Well, that's a population. Well, more than one population can live together. So if there's more than one herd of elk living in an area, maybe there's a couple, 2, 3, 4 herds all living together in one area, that's called a community. Well, the community involves a lot more than just the elk and the populations of elk. There can be all kinds of things, like other animals, predators. And this elk has something to worry about because there are wolves in the area, and the wolves want to eat the elk. And so this type of situation, just because they're living in the same area doesn't mean it's safe. So sometimes neighbors eat each other. And the community is filled with lots of different creatures. Some that are in competition with our elk for the resources that our elk needs, whether it be living space or water or food, or somebody who looks at the elk as dinner and that elk has to flee in order to make sure that it can survive a little bit longer. Now, an ecosystem is where an animal lives in an area. It includes all of the other living creatures in the area, the plants and the animals. It also includes the non-living parts, air, water, soil, rocks, anything that might be in that area, and how this animal will interact with them. Maybe the elk needs to get some water. Maybe it needs to find a place to bed down for the night to sleep. Well, all of these different factors come into play, and our elk needs to interact with these different things within the ecosystem. Now, our elk does pretty well in the taiga. That's the colder forested area that you'll find like in northern Canada and Russia. These areas right here, they're pretty cold. They can sustain a large creature pretty well, and it's a good place for the elk to live. But what if we moved our elk to the middle of the Sahara Desert? How do you think he'd do? Yeah, probably not so well. It's very hot. It's very dry. There's not much grasses there in the desert to eat. So our elk probably wouldn't be able to adapt very well to living in this environment, and he'd probably die out pretty quickly. So different biomes will provide an environment that is good for certain creatures, but not others. Our elk likes to move around in the daytime. Well, animals who live in a desert usually move around at night to avoid that hot sun. And our elk would have a hard time with that. So there's many problems with our elk moving to a different biome. So our elk friend probably wouldn't do too well in a desert, or an ocean, or a lot of other different biomes. It just wouldn't fit. So our elk is adapted to living in a certain biome. And that biome is just right for our elk based upon its size, its temperature, the amount of water in the area, and the altitude. All of these are factors that we have to look at. The last tier above the ecosystem above the biome, is the biosphere. And that's the atmosphere and the air and all the things within Earth and everything that is used. There are two major factors that determine whether an animal or a plant can live in a certain environment, in a certain biome. And those two factors are water and temperature. If we look at our elk, and we take our elk and drop him in the middle of the Sahara Desert, he's not going to make it very well. And that's simply because his body's not designed for it. It gets too hot in the day and too cold at night. Well, his body's big enough that it could handle those things, but it's the other factors that will do it, like what the temperatures will do to his food sources. And will he be able to handle the food in that area? Also, water. Is there going to be enough water for our elk in that area? Probably not. Same thing goes if we drop him in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Lots of water, but that's not the right water, and he's not really designed to swim. Also, temperature, Temperature in the water is a little different than it is on land with the air temperatures. So it's probably going to have a negative effect. The third factor is going to be altitude. It doesn't affect large animals like elk and humans and things like that quite as much as it does small animals, but it can have a factor as well.